we'll move on now to the main purpose of this morning, which is, or this afternoon now. As someone based in Oxford, it's been really great to observe the onward march of the Relational Schools programme and to learn of the brilliant work that's being done in Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire and Portsmouth, very ably supported by friends from the Restorative Lab. So I'm really delighted to welcome Anna, Molly, Laura, Claire and Bec to share with us what's happening in those respective locations. The way the structure of the event's going to work, Anna's going to kick us off with an overview of the Relational Schools programme. Then we're going to hear about the experiences from Gloucester, Oxfordshire and Portsmouth. Then Anna will come back and elaborate on the core principles, and then hopefully we'll have some good time at the end for questions and discussion, because that will be really important. Anna's going to be the in charge of the slides, so I'm going to say once again thanks to all for coming and to our brilliant speakers, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello everybody, my name's Dr. Anna Gregory. I'm from the Restorative Lab. I found something out this morning and I wondered if you'd just help me with it, just as an experiment. I heard that if you smile, you can't feel your tongue. I don't know if you want to just have a go, like just try and smile and see if you can. Oh, I'm only joking. You can, but you all look gorgeous. And that was really lovely to see. And thank you for taking part in my little trick. The more that we learn about this stuff, this social contagion, the more that we relate what Dr. Bruce Perry is telling us about affect and the brain and how we need to be in good connection with each other, the more this stuff kind of makes sense to us. We sort of know that we need to connect before we do content. So thank you for taking part in that. And let's hope that some neurons that fire together can wire together better on for today from that. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the lab and this thing called the Relational and Restorative Schools Leadership Programme before handing over to the experts who are looking after this work in their locality. So I'm one of 3 founding members and directors of the Restorative Lab. We do training, research and consultancy, and we support organisations mainly in organisation with the what, the how and the why of this thing called relational and restorative practice. To be honest, we have little work to do with the what of this stuff. We all are here for a reason, and we have that knowledge kind of out in the ether these days about, particularly in the UK, how we are transitioning in education from restorative justice into restorative approaches, whole school approaches, restorative practices, relational and restorative practices, and recognizing that we're kind of on a journey of understanding what the what is. The lab helps organisations specifically with the how, so developing the skills and the systems to support people, places and processes to help with their building, maintaining of repairing of relationships. And we also like to help with the why, so why this stuff works. Some people we understand don't need convincing. They know why, they are able to connect or reconnect with this stuff, but some people really benefit from understanding kind of the evidence and the research behind, you know, why this stuff works, and that's really where we come in. So we've been really honoured to learn from and work with the UK-based local authorities who you're going to hear from today to develop this thing called the Relational and Restorative Leadership Programme, though it takes different forms and different titles in each of the councils that we work in. So I'll start, as Rosie says, by just giving you a little bit of an overview. of how we see the work, and then you'll hear the juicy stuff, the detail, from colleagues in chronological order of where this began. So hearing first from Molly in Gloucestershire, moving over to Clare and Laura in Oxfordshire, and then we've got Bec and Nick in Portsmouth. Rosie, can you see the slides all right? Just so I know I'm talking. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Got thumbs up. So we have partnered with these councils, and this partnership, that's the Restorative Lab there in the middle, really focuses on embedding restorative and relational practices in schools, but also in the organisations that support schools, through integrating this work specific to the needs of each local authority. So we are trying to work alongside specialists from within the council and those school leaders as well. And then we sort of come in, and we're not expected to stay in. We leave hoping that the context is, you know, solidified and healthy. So this is really a collaboration. And in this collaboration, we've designed a leadership programme that works closely with the teams to foster positive relationships in these educational environments. And the aim is to create sustainable environments by prioritising relationships, emotional well-being, inclusive dialogue, and ensuring that these restorative principles become a core part of school leadership and culture. And what we've learned, which won't be a surprise, I'm sure, is that these systems around the schools really need to be supported. So what has developed over time and really pioneered by the work in Gloucestershire is this offer that the leadership programme kind of plugs into. So you'll hear more about the leadership programme shortly, but there is also an understanding that there needs to be some developed awareness and knowledge around trauma-informed relational practices and what they look like, feel like. The local authority needs to know about this, but more than know about it, be part of it as well, those supporting those schools. And we're hoping to develop a community of practice amongst those leaders, so that once we are out of the picture as the lab, and once the model has kind of shifted and morphed to become context specific for that local authority, that group of leaders have their community of practice to keep themselves going. Molly will talk about how this kind of started as a particular programme and how it's changing over time. And then the rest of the local authority colleagues will talk about their context, and we'll hear about how it has changed over time as well. And that's just to say that the lab has some expertise, but it's the local authority that has the context needed to support these ways of working ongoing. So with that, we offer a 10-day programme that runs over 18 months. This isn't a one-day training programme. And I've got an overview of a recent programme that we're running. And to say, you know, I want to acknowledge that each one has defined outcomes and identified areas of content coverage, but there is an important element that we want to meet the needs of that local authority, that context, but also the needs of that group. So in each way, the programme responds to the emerging and the evolving needs of group members within their localities. To sum up, we are asking for the leader of each organisation, school organisation, to be part of this, and that is explicit in that request. It works well if for secondary schools we want 2 leaders to attend, just because of the size and the nature of those organisations. We're welcoming colleagues from further education now, and from universities, and certainly from alternative provision and from SEND. And we consciously seek to take the participants out of school. So these sessions, these day-long sessions, are running from 8:30 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon, in village halls and in town halls, and spaces and places in which the leader can de-roll and enter into a learning space along with colleagues that feels as safe as it can be for them to really learn and enter into this transformative work, and then go back, try it and test it, fail fabulously, as Mark Osborne says, and then come back a few months later and talk about what worked, what they're going to do next time. And then, you know, kind of re-establish who they want to be as this relational and restorative leader, whilst affecting the systems and the processes that they are responsible for. So I'm going to stop talking and be in charge of Molly's slides, who will take over and give you the Gloucestershire context. Over to you, Molly.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm Molly Macleod. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am the Relational and Restorative Practice Lead at Gloucestershire County Council, and I've been in post since 2016. So I was just going to take you through our journey, which is an ongoing journey. We are continually developing this offer with our schools and our partners for our schools in Gloucestershire. So, thanks, Anna. Our story starts in 2016, where the Vulnerable Children's Partnership Board were looking for a new model of practice. The Partnership Board was made up of health, education, schools, police, and they were looking for a practice model to give them consistency of language and approach for their service users. So they chose restorative practice, and we started our 7 pilot areas, 2 of which were in schools, 1 primary, 1 secondary. So over the first year, both schools had really good outcomes, initial kind of reductions in exclusions, increase in attendance. And at the time of beginning this, Gloucestershire were the 4th highest excluding county in the country. So I think there was something like 141 permanent exclusions in 2016. So the then Director of Education was really interested in this approach that could reduce those exclusions. So he then committed to 5 years worth of funding to roll out restorative practice across more of our schools in Gloucestershire. So 2017, can you move us on, please, Anna? Thanks. 2017 saw the introduction of ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, into the county. There was a big conference at the end of 2017 and a rollout of training programs into schools. There was also a real kind of push around trauma-informed approaches training going into schools from a variety of sources. So alongside restorative, we kind of started to look at the synergy between all of these different areas of work. So we use the framework What So What Now, what Terry Borton's 3-question framework. And very simply put, the ACEs, for us, the adverse experience for the child was the what, so the thing that happened. The understanding about trauma for staff was they, in schools, were starting to understand how that showed up in behaviour for the pupils that they were working with and for each other. You know, we've all experienced some form of trauma. The restorative practice then was able to work with the schools and give them approaches and language that would be able to de-escalate conflict when it did happen, and to be able to build stronger relationships. So sorry, not quite yet, Anna. we noticed in our schools that we're employing all of these 3 approaches, that they were having a lot more impact than the schools that were only employing either trauma-informed or restorative. So we started to look at bringing them all together. We worked with a number of subject experts, so psychologists, restorative practitioners, trauma-informed leads, school leads, and we started to look at all the elements that we needed to come together for this approach. We didn't have a name for this approach by this point, but we wanted to call it the umbrella term really of trauma-informed relational practice. And these were the 15 modules that we all agreed collectively needed to be part of the approach. So moving through the relational modules really around principles and value-based practice, relationships, emotions, behavior, into the kind of more trauma-informed world around attachment, ACEs, shame, harm and conflict, and moving then into restorative approaches, and how our own understanding of our own stress and behaviors impacted those of others. So we created these 15 modules and we're trialing them in schools. The schools by this point has started to call themselves relational schools as an umbrella term, because they were delivering much more than just restorative practice. So also we're kind of 2018-19, we were running a train the trainer program for GCC leaders and for school leaders. And what we noticed was that those school leaders, we were going less and less into their schools. Like, because of the train the trainer program, they didn't need our support ongoing as much as the other schools where we've just been delivering training. And so we started then to consciously move away from a train the trainer approach into a leadership program. And we moved our model into when schools would approach us wanting, you know, an inset day or to embed this approach, we would ask them first to come on a leadership program, because we knew by that point that we needed to start with the leaders and start with the leadership self journey, really. So that takes us up to kind of 2019, and then 2020 and the pandemic hit. So a number of things happened, not all negative. One of the things that we noticed was in the schools where this approach was being applied, they had much higher attendance for both pupils and staff. They had reported much higher well-being. And a number of our schools approached us and asked us to deliver some training for other schools who hadn't yet taken on board this approach around circles and wellbeing circles for staff particularly. So we ran a programme in conjunction with the lab and Carmanor School in Leeds for about 80 leaders around the importance of wellbeing and staff wellbeing at this time. We started also to think about our offer and moved away from what we were calling train and hope, this idea that experts just randomly go into schools and deliver loads of training and hope it kind of sticks and it makes sense to people, to being much more cognizant about the sequencing and the overall program. So bringing all of these elements together in a pathway that made sense to schools. So starting absolutely with the relational practices. So this idea of strengthening relationships, looking at the role of the safe and trusted adult, and making sure that we were creating environments where people felt safe and as though they had a sense of belonging in their community. Before then introducing this idea of trauma-informed approaches and then eventually going into restorative, we also started to be very clear about working with the adults first before we went anywhere near the young people. And so one of the books, so this graphic is from Louise Bommer's book, Know Me to Teach Me, which came out in 2020 and at the time was really validating for us, because she had taken Bruce Perry's 3Rs model of neurosequential therapeutics and added a 4th R. So it takes you from the trauma-informed approaches into restorative, in the 4th R being repair, which for us was kind of great. Okay, we know now we're on the right lines. The other thing that we started to look at, because it was COVID, was moving some of the training online, which for a relational person is really difficult. But we ended up actually with a blended learning approach, which we think works really well. So our model for training then follows what we call the 3 T's. So transmissive, transactional, and transformative. So the transmissive element is the content, and that's delivered in an online e-learning module and is designed to be engaged with individually, because what we were finding is that some of the messages around ACEs and trauma-informed training were re-triggering people. And so we wanted them to be able to engage with the material and do their first learning in their own private space in a time that worked for them. So the online modules that you saw 15 of, they are all very carefully kind of built in a spiral learning effect, really, so that as people engage with them, they are building their own understanding of this work more holistically. Once they've engaged with the learning module, they then are part of a practice discussion circle. So people in school coming together in a small group to discuss how they've interacted with the material and how others have interacted with it and what they want to do with the material moving forward. How do they apply it in their setting? So that practice discussion circle is a really important, that's the transactional part where they're looking as a school community about what they want to do with this. The leadership program then is the transformative part where the leaders are enabling those changes to happen by unblocking the system in schools. So whether that's the school day with structures, whether that's a curriculum, whether that's policies or processes, they're able then to apply the learning that the staff are engaged with in changes happening in school. It was also around kind of 21, 22 that we started to pull together what we now call our relational schools model, which is the leadership program, trauma-informed relational practice, CPD for staff, plus the advanced modules around restorative facilitation skills and circle skills. And by 2022, we'd started to look at trading this offer and this model with other local authorities. So that began our relationship with Staffordshire County Council, Oxfordshire, Portsmouth, a number of other local authorities that we were engaged with through the national network. So some of the impacts that we've seen in our schools over the last 5 years, those on an Ofsted journey, improvement journey, have seen grades go from requires improvement or even inadequate up to good, which has been fantastic. One of the things that has been the most prevalent has been the observation of the strengthening of relationships between adults and children and between adults, not just the kind of reduction in exclusions and increase in attendance, but this idea of a more cohesive school community that includes parents. It also includes those in the system around the school. So we've been very clear about taking our offer that we develop for schools into the system. So we train GCC staff, so the educational psychologists, the inclusion officers, the social workers, the early help workers that all go into school, all get trained too, so that people share the same language. They share the understanding of what this approach is trying to do. And we're able to unblock the wider system too. We've created things like Team Around the School, which is a multi-agency approach. We have multi-agency intervention circles. We've got a whole range of kind of initiatives and approaches that support the schools to be able to deliver this and be able to change their way of working. We've also gone into the University of Gloucestershire. We're looking at working with a PGC lead to develop the initial teacher training offer. We're working with the alternative provisions. We're trying to take a very systemic view in Gloucestershire and look at everybody being on board with this way of working. We've also given evidence nationally. We're part of the APPG report for restorative practices in education that came out in 2023. part of we were a case study for the Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition, looking at improving behaviour and the impact of punitive systems on mental well-being for young people. We're also now accredited with the RJC and are helping them to develop a new quality assurance mark for schools wanting to embed a relational and restorative approach based on all the research that we have contributed to developing in the field over the last 8 years. So our model as it stands at the moment is a 3-year model. The first year is leadership, so it starts with the leaders and it's their self-transformation journey. The second year is the staff CPD and looking at their interaction with the school leaders and what skills they need and knowledge they need to be able to embed this approach, what changes need to happen in the school community, before looking at the wider community, the pupils, the parents and the professionals, and what training and skills and knowledge they need. So that's where we're at the moment.
Thanks, Molly.
Come back next year, it might be different.
So great, and I know there's going to be loads of questions, so if you can hold on to them until we've heard from everybody, there will be a chance for Q&A afterwards, setting a very high bar for timing there as well, Molly, so very grateful. We are now going to hear, and again it's interesting just to note that this is chronological, so where it started in Gloucestershire and where they have been impacting change nationally, we come next to Oxfordshire and hearing from Claire and Laura.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm going to speak first. So I'm Clare Pike. I'm the head of the virtual school in Oxfordshire, and I was initially the Relational Schools project lead. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Anna. So you'll see on this slide that Oxfordshire has essentially tried 3 times in recent years to promote restorative ways of working in our schools. From the early 2000s to 2019, the local authority essentially promoted restorative justice as a way to tackle all forms of bullying in our schools. And back then, training was rolled out via the anti-bullying coordinator, who was largely influenced by the work of, for example, Belinda Hopkins and Marshall Rosenberg. And then in 2019, as the then newly appointed lead for learner engagement, I was tasked, so the anti-bullying coordinator had retired, I was tasked with rolling out restorative practice training to our schools. And this was mainly delivered through insets and twilights. And the message at the time was that restorative justice, or RJ, should be seen as a last resort. So doing an RJ does not make a school restorative. It's sort of acting once the horse has bolted. And so the training focused on whole school approaches to building better relationships and promoting early intervention as a way to prevent conflict from happening in the first place. And after whole school training, schools at the time were invited to send a suitable representative to access 3-day practitioner skills training and join a community of support and practice. Now, after 3 years of that restorative practice rollout, 62 of our settings had received training, and 35 staff from those settings had been trained up as skilled practitioners. And despite the pandemic, and as Molly said, it was tricky because not all the training was done in person, we saw at the time a 90% reduction in suspensions within schools that were trained, an 83% reduction in permanent exclusions where they'd permanently excluded before, and we saw 96% successful reintegration into school of non-attending learners from restorative interventions. We also trained our school police officers who were able to prevent exclusions and criminalisation in some cases using restorative approaches. But even with that, I would say that only 1/3 of schools really showed the commitment to embrace this approach. And as is still the case, and Laura will talk a bit more about this in a minute, I at the time was working with schools who were willing to engage. You can't really force people to adopt this approach. So in hindsight, the restorative justice and the restorative practice rollouts, as Molly coined, were sort of train and hope initiatives that were specifically aimed at improving attendance, reducing suspensions and exclusions, and tackling bullying in our schools. Those rollouts didn't fully support the cultural shift needed in our schools to enable sustained improvements through improved relationships. And yeah, despite not forcing participation, I would say that we were essentially doing to schools for reasons, as I said before, to improve attendance, reduce suspensions and so on, and hoping for the best. But as much as the pandemic was incredibly tricky, and you know, we could say more about that, I believe the pandemic was a bit of a gift in this work in Oxfordshire, because it really shifted things. And towards the latter part of the pandemic, there was a SEND engagement piece of work that was undertaken, and schools in Oxfordshire were actually asking us for help with meeting increased social, emotional, mental health needs that they were faced with. And so what we did was we were able to use de-delegated contributions from schools and delivering better value SEND funding to trial Gloucestershire's Relational Schools programme, because by this time I'd met Molly through the Relational and Restorative network, and she knew of what I was doing, and I was moving jobs into the virtual school. And as you can imagine, as a virtual school head, this sort of work for me is going to disproportionately benefit our care experienced children as well as all children. So this led to a collaborative effort to shift school cultures, and I think a healthy move from doing to working with, because the schools were asking for this support. And so it's through the current rollout that I feel certainly we can achieve that sustained change, and where we've brought relational and restorative practice together. So I'm now going to hand over to Laura to talk more about the Relational Schools programme as the now project lead.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Laura. I'm the Relational Schools programme lead for Oxfordshire, and my role sits within the SEND team in Oxfordshire. So we've got that link with the SEND team as well. So where we are at the moment, our Relational Schools programme has 4 cohorts underway. Cohort 1 are finishing in March 25, so we're nearly at the end of that part of the journey. Cohort 2 is halfway, and then cohorts 3 and 4 started in September this year. Interesting to say about our cohorts is that we've got some hybrid cohorts. So we've got schools on board, earlier settings, secondaries and primaries, 1 post-16, but we've also then got representatives from Oxfordshire County Council and other agencies such as CAMS or school health nursing. So we've got a mix of participants on our cohorts, which has been really positive. We've got circles facilitation training happening and has happened for all 4 cohorts. The initial cohort, this was delivered for us by our lovely colleagues in Gloucestershire, and we in effect got trained at the same time with our EP service, who are delivering it at the moment, and then we've got plans for the future about how we can make that sustainable. We're really interested in our baseline data and audits as well. So when all schools start, there's a baseline data audit. The leadership programme all take part in a survey to get their baseline, and then staff and students in each school are taking part in those as well, so that we can get a story for each setting, track progress and also our achievements over time, because it's really nice for the schools to see the small wins as well as the bigger picture in this cultural shift. they're aware it takes time, so those small wins that they can share, particularly with governors or Ofsted, are really important for us, as well as those snapshots as we move on. There's also a midpoint survey that we do, and we're hoping that the work after the programme, so once this relational programme has finished for the leaders, we'll continue to work with them. As Molly mentioned, it's a long-term shift. It's over at least 3 years. So we're hoping that then we'll have some really good data to support the fact that we're moving away from a train and hope model, and that we can really get that embedded in schools. We've also got an implementation programme in place, which covers many of the things that Molly talked about, but we've got the 3-day restorative practitioner training available, mentoring options, school immersion visits, and we're trying to make links between cohorts, so to develop that community of support and practice between them. So each individual cohort have made really good links with each other, but we also want them to make links between cohorts. We've got schools from different multi-academy trusts on various cohorts as well, so that's a really nice link for us, as well as the local partnerships. We've had some really good progress so far from the schools, acknowledging the hard work that they've put into that. But some really good news, early success stories about improved staff wellbeing and morale has been a key theme, reduction in staff absence, and therefore for schools, a reduction in cost of cover. One of our secondary schools has reported a reduction in suspensions by nearly 50%. I think it was 47%. And the relationships they are building are much stronger, and where they were tested before, there's less disruption and less negative impact. There's also stronger links between schools and other agencies. So the links between schools and our OCC teams, for example, being able to make a link with a face to a name, being able to make that contact and access really, really key for those teams. So the Oxfordshire programme moving forward, we're looking at how we can make it sustainable for future cohorts. Currently, the model in Oxfordshire is that this has been funded. And we want to try and keep it that way if we can for schools, so that we've got equity across schools being able to access the training. So we're currently in the process of trying to sort that out with a potential train the trainer programme and moving forward into cohort 5 and beyond. But we're looking at that becoming our business as usual, the way we do things in Oxfordshire, making sure it's embedded into communities as well. We know currently we are preaching to the converted. As we said, all the schools who are currently on board have opted to be part of this and are really engaged and keen. They've actively signed up. So we're looking at ways to get this into schools who haven't heard of the programme or are potentially harder to reach. We're also looking at how we can roll this out across OCC as a county council, but particularly focusing on the children, education and families teams at the moment. So those representatives are already on the cohort, how that can be spread into their teams and wider, so that when those teams are going into schools, they're using the same approaches. But also so that there's a consistency in language and approach across all of our practice. We are also looking at developing specific options to support our early years and private nurseries. We have got some early year settings on board, and from the feedback we know when they're in schools, it's a lot easier for them to implement this. Our standalone early year settings and nurseries, we need to find something a bit different to help and support the staff they have and to make it work for them. And we're looking at a multi-academy trust rollout as well, how we can make that work so that we're not filling our cohorts with schools from one multi-academy trust, but ways that we can have kind of lighthouse or focus schools that can then develop this practice and share it with other schools in their trusts. And we're also looking at how we can acknowledge the work of schools on the programme who are working in this way, so that there's some kind of Oxfordshire recognition for those schools while we're working on making sure this is embedded. And like Molly said, with the RJC options coming in, but we want a kind of system to say whether schools are on board or not, and what stage of the process they're in, so that they are acknowledged, but also we can celebrate their successes. And that is it for Oxfordshire.
Thanks, Oxfordshire. Thanks, Laura and Claire. Well, you've got another dynamic duo coming up, this time from the south of the country in the form of Portsmouth. Am I right to hand over to you, Bec and Nick?
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And thanks to colleagues from Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. So we're the newest to this journey. I'm going to start off. My name is Bec Mason. I'm the Relational and Restorative Practice in Schools Implementation Lead. And I'm doing a bit of a double act with Nicola Payne, who's one of our head teachers, who's on the Leaders Programme. Who's going to talk a little bit about how their journey has been impacted. So for those of you that don't know, Portsmouth sort of in the middle-ish of the south coast. We're a waterfront city. We've got huge amounts of waterfront, which we love. We're a population of about 210,000. We've got 48,000 or so children, and we've actually got 61 schools, because just recently one of our primary it's become a primary school. It was an infant junior school, so it says 62, but actually we're 61. So we're a small unitary authority, and I think we have a tradition probably of punching a little bit higher than our weight. We've got 17 local authority schools and 44 schools in multi-academy trusts. So our journey started back in 2016. We took a decision as a local authority that, much like what Molly described for Oxfordshire, that there were better outcomes in authorities where there was a single practice model. And the practice model that we adopted was relational and restorative practice, and the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children's Partnership led on the training around that model. The Safeguarding Children's Partnership still has the role that I have, and still looks after the multi-agency training for the whole of the children's workforce. But relational and restorative practice back then was embedded, as it still is now, into our children's trust plan and into our education strategy. The PEP, the Portsmouth Education Partnership, has been a real key player in some of the sort of success that we have had. It's a really strong partnership between the local authority and all the multi-academy trusts. So all the multi-academy trusts have a seat at the strategic board for the PEP. And that's been one of the reasons why we've seen the impact that we have in schools and with schools in multi-academy trusts. One of the things that schools were telling us, particularly, and that's the sort of obviously the focus for today rather than the rest of the kind of children's workforce, is that where people were really motivated around relational and restorative practice, it was difficult to embed it in the way that people wanted to. And so that a sort of call came out for greater resourcing for schools. So over the last couple of years, there's been increased resourcing for schools. But in the last year, a specialist post, the post that I have, was created to help schools with that embedding. And I'll say a bit more about what that looks like in a moment. But just to say, one particular school, one of our secondary schools, was a real kind of led a charge around this. And we've got some particular issues with education in the city. We've got issues with our Key Stage 2 results. We've got some real challenges with some of our GCSE results and children that are severely absent, as well as historic issues around exclusions. Now, Trafalgar, one of the secondary schools that had led the charge with relational and restorative practice, probably not quite the right language to use. It doesn't sound very peaceful, does it, leading the charge? But forgive me, I'm sure you know what I mean. Where most of our secondary schools around sort of 2021, 22, we're seeing in the region of 100 temporary or permanent exclusions each year. Trafalgar School was seeing 2. So there was a lot of attention around how were they doing that, and they attributed that to their commitment to relational and restorative practice. So as part of the work that was happening in schools, we followed suit with Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire, and we funded the Leaders Programme for our schools. So it's fully funded. The exciting thing for us is that we've just commissioned our 3rd cohort, which will begin in May of 2025. And by the time that cohort is running, we're going to have 50% of our head teachers on that programme. Currently, we've got 23 head teachers on that programme. A bit like Oxfordshire as well, it is blended, it's a hybrid, so we do have colleagues from the local authority education provision and children's social care as well. But we're excited to see, particularly with the kind of energy that there is around this, what might happen for us when we've got more than 50% of our head teachers on that programme. And again, similar to Gloucestershire, we've worked with local universities and embedding that into the local teacher education, teacher training provision. So the definition that we use is this one, as it's a contested area. Some places have just relational practice, some have restorative practice, and we've used this one locally. Some schools are developing their own, but I think this really encapsulates what it is that we are trying to do. And I think for us in the Safeguarding Children's Partnership and in this work with schools, also we're really informed by the Harvard Adult Development Study and this idea that actually without good relationships, very simply our lives are sicker, sadder and shorter. The next slide just shows you a little bit of the offer to schools. So absolutely, culture and ethos work is right at the heart of what we're doing. And we're at early days in terms of evaluation, but the area on the right in terms of outcomes, that's what we're looking to see. We've got early signs, but it is early signs at this stage. In terms of our schools, just about half of our secondary schools are on board with this work. Some of that is broader than the Leaders programme. About 30 of our 40 or so primaries are engaged. That's about 70%, which is really exciting. But I'm going to hand over to Nicola Payne in just a moment. I'm going to ask her some questions. We can do it as a little Q&A, because of our specialist schools, 80% they're engaged with this programme, and the trust that Nick is a part of, the Solent Academies Trust, are really leading the way. So what I'm going to do is I've got a few questions, and the slides, Nick, I'm not sure if you caught this bit at the beginning, but if you do want Anna to move us through the slides, then please do. But Nick, first off, do you want to just paint us a picture of your school, Cliffdale School?
Thanks, Bec. Cliffdale is a special primary school for children with profound and complex social communication difficulties, learning difficulties, and communication difficulties more broadly. We have got children who are typically working at least 5 or 6 years below their chronological age. And we have got at least half the school who are non-verbal with their communication, and all of the kind of sensory needs that fit in around that. The school has been through a period of very rapid growth. So when I joined the school about 7 years ago, we had 11 classes. We're now at 27 classes. The staff has more than doubled in that time as well because of the complexity of need. So that gives us a little bit of context.
Fantastic, thanks, Nick. And tell us a little bit about your sort of relational and restorative journey, because you've really led so amazingly around that, and you were inspired by Trafalgar, but obviously that's a regular secondary school, and you had to do a lot of work to make this work for your school. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The next slide kind of gives a little visual, I think, of the journey. We had originally, when some of this work was going on in Portsmouth, we were really interested in it because we had recognised that because of that growth, also because of the pandemic and working in these kind of very specific phases in the school, we'd become quite a fragmented community. We'd amalgamated with the nursery school next door. So we had different staff teams that weren't collaborating particularly well together. But sometimes you can feel as a special school that some of the work that's going on is not necessarily for you. Anyway, we decided to give it a go, went along, had a look at Trafalgar, which is the secondary school that Bec talked about. And then were faced with the challenge of how could we translate some of the amazing practice that we had seen at Trafalgar into our very different special primary school. And initially, I was thinking that some of the work with staff was probably about as far as we were going to get. So we knew that we wanted to introduce community circles. We knew that something like solution circles was going to work incredibly well, particularly around sorting out some of those more complex behaviour difficulties that our children face. But then actually what we wanted to do and we were inspired by were things like the vertical tutor groups that Trafalgar had, where different ages of the students there were supporting each other. And I heard a story when I visited about they've got an inclusion centre, resource provision, whatever it might be called, and one of their students with autism was having a really challenging time in the playground. They'd kicked over a bin and were struggling. And actually, none of the staff needed to get involved in helping with that situation because the peers around noticed what had happened, put their arms around and calmed that young person who was in difficulty, took them back to their safe place, while other students were carefully putting back the bin to where it should be in the playground and making sure that everything was back to normal. And I thought, how wonderful. And how could we spend that time collaborating with our children and making sure that they had a voice for themselves and for others? So we introduced something called team time, and I think there might be a slide somewhere which shows some photographs of team time. That's our values. The next one on. And this was with our 5 colour teams that do sort of sit with our values, but how children across the school could come together at a time on a Friday with the main focus of establishing different kinds of relationships with each other. And then that kind of translated into sitting in assembly together. And what that then led to is children, when they had their annual reviews, we'd historically had some children whose class, whose friends couldn't meaningfully say something about their friend. We like to have a page that says what my friends say about me. But after we'd introduced team time, every single child in the school could have a page with what my friends say about me, because they all had children who could make some comments about them. And that showed the community, it showed the belonging, and our families were really moved by their children being included in that way. So it's a really powerful thing.
Fantastic, thanks, Nick. Now, I'm just going to check in with Anna because I've got one more question that I'd really like to ask. Are we okay? Because
You've got
we've
time.
overshot our time. Is
Yeah,
that okay? Thank you.
You're good.
All right, thanks, Anna. So Nick, my last question is just about how you've used solution-focused circles with your staff teams, because that's been quite impacting as well, hasn't it? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had to set up community circles first, and actually what we found was how scary initially that was for our staff. There were comments like, oh, it looks like we're about to be in a wedding, when they walked into the hall with all of these circles set up. But once they'd got used to playing games in their circles, they'd got used to how they could talk about a discussion, for example, and then they got used to sharing good practice in their circles. They were then kind of comfortable with that format to do something which it was a bit scarier, which was to talk about things that they were struggling with. But it was something that we thought was incredibly important as a school. We wanted to mobilise expertise across the school because we had pockets of excellence that we wanted to share more broadly. But we also really wanted to live our ethos that there isn't one person who knows more, and that when you work together, you're going to get a better outcome. So with these really kind of persistent and tricky problems, we were able to discuss these things in a circle and safely come up with different ways of working. So that has been in class teams, it has been with teachers in teachers meetings, it has been across the whole school. So it could be reactive or it could be proactive. But I've seen how quickly the impact of that can work. So I was in one solution circle where we were talking about a child who was eating everybody else's food and not eating anything in his own lunchbox. And then from the ideas that came, half an hour later, the teacher had come to me with all of these different resources that she'd made from those ideas. And we saw a huge improvement just the next day. So it's really rapid and really increases collaboration in the school.
Fantastic. Nick, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate hearing from an actual head teacher who's doing it on the ground. And it's been really exciting with you on the Leaders Programme and also many colleagues from your Academy Trust to see what's been happening. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Anna.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for their contributions. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. That's your cue for questions coming up shortly. Rosie, am I all right to cue you up to start looking through the chat if stuff's been coming there whilst I just draw us back to a little bit of theory about what happens in the leadership programme that these participants have been talking about the impact. So what goes into it to get to where they are, alongside the other elements, certainly, that the local authority is supporting. So we call this our learner or learning progression pathway. And that's to acknowledge that we are seeking to develop the person and how they implement stuff back in their setting. And this is a sequential and iterative build of knowledge and understanding about what relational and restorative practice is. And we want it to be in their body, you know, we want it to be in them to be able to then go on and transform the systems that they're working within. So they're applying learning to their personal practice, and then in parallel, they're building their strategic thinking around restorative and relational implementation to inform the strategic actions that they want. And put really simply, we kind of focus the personal stuff in the morning when we're doing our regulating and our relating to each other and getting into it and this embodied practice of doing this stuff. And then once we're secure in that, in the afternoon, we move to more strategic implementation. So over the 10 sessions, you know, you would hopefully see that pattern kind of play out. We've got Dr. Terence Bevington as part of the lab, so he likes to make things really clear and put them into boxes and come up with ideas about stuff. So this is one of his things. We wanted to identify that we are, you know, working with particular theories that to develop certain sensibilities in people and recognise that we're working at different levels as well in terms of developing the self and how we are between other people and around other people as well as the systems that we connect with too. So as Molly said, we're seeking not to just transmit information to colleagues, but actually work on some transformation that's happening for themselves and between others. And we are trying all the time with our activities to work at the levels of the bio, the psycho and the social. So how are we working with the body, with the mind and between ourselves? And really the development of this is how we are doing this embodied and relationally. So we can use as many slides as we want, but how are we getting people to connect and how are we getting them to understand what is happening for them and between them, inside of them and between them. So there's lots of games, there's lots of group work, there's lots of relational activities and sharing. And the methodologies that we use are appreciative and strengths-based. We are informed by theatre of the oppressed and drama work, and certainly there is lots and lots of participatory action stuff in there as well. So we've got one more bit to share with you, and that's really just to come to the group and ask for key messages. So having gone through this development, we've got this beautiful audience here today. What key messages, what one line would you want to share with the people here today before we move on to some Q&A? I'm going to go round in that sequential order, if that's all right, and come to you, Molly, first of all, and then work it round. Molly, what key message would you have to share?
Message, go slowly. It takes time. It's culture change. It's not an intervention. Start with the leadership, because this is personal transformation and role modelling. And if they don't get it, it's never going to land. And learn from others who have been there and done it before. Go and see it in action would be my key.
Thank you. Claire and Laura, from you guys, key message.
Mine would be time. The time that the actual programme takes is designed in that way because it takes that long for it to happen, but also it gives the leaders the time to step away and be reflective and fully embed that change. So yeah, for me, it's all about the time.
And Claire?
I think listen to your schools and hear from them what they need. I think for me, the shift in Oxfordshire came when, as I said, we moved from doing to working with, and schools had acknowledged a need that we could meet through this programme. And before that, they weren't invested in the same way. And you don't need to charge them for them to have skin in the game, so to speak. I think they just need to acknowledge that it's a need that you're helping them to meet through that collaboration. And so we've had much more success in terms of schools really immersing themselves in the programme since they said this is what we need. So I would say listen to your schools and understand what they need, and through that then comes the sort of that beautiful sort of collaboration that's essential.
Thanks. And Bec and Nick, key messages.
Yeah, I think for me, it's around, relational and restorative practice is absolutely what our world needs right now. I think our learning locally has been to meet people where they are. Like others have said, to take the small wins, to be patient, and investing in the leaders means that you can then do the work to move from being individually relational to organisationally relational, the kind of situationally relational to systemically relational, implicitly relational to explicitly relational. Nick, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think it does take time, and I think our tendency in schools is to rush on to the next thing, the next bit, and that might be just thinking about taking the time to play games with the staff and not feeling like you're wasting time doing that, because you really get a huge amount out of that, and then when they learn a bit more, they're kind of realizing what's going in behind that. But also I've been thinking about how things that I think I've said it before, or I'm stating the obvious, how important some of those messages are and how important they are to keep coming back to.
Thank you. Rosie, I spotted 2 questions in the chat. Shall I pick those up and then
yes, please.
Hand over to you to close?
Yeah.
Charlotte has identified that in a report, schools are saying they're using restorative conversations. 56% say they're using it, but only 11% say that they work. They don't work. What can be done to improve train and hope outcomes? And there's a mention of Dorset County Council mentioning relational and restorative practices in their education strategy. But how can we kind of move this thinking forward from something that is in there but not working? Any thoughts coming up from our colleagues here? Molly, I can see your eyebrows going, so I think you've got
Oh, you know me well, Anna. I would suggest that those schools where it doesn't work are not employing the relational and the trauma-informed elements, because I think if you are in a school where you don't feel safe and you don't feel as though your voice is valued, you're much less likely to want to repair relationships. And that's been our biggest learning on all of this journey, really, is that employing restorative approaches by themselves without an understanding of trauma and the impact it has, and the need for creating safe, psychologically safe spaces, you need that in order for restorative to work. And so I would be really interested to know what policies and processes those schools have got around trauma-informed approaches and relational approaches.
Okay, I can see strong nodding, but also a hand up from Liz Webster, who I think concurs with what you're saying, but perhaps also has a question too, Liz.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you to all of the speakers today. I think it's really gratifying to hear that we're moving from the train and hope model into one that is really recognizing what is needed. I got into this in Chicago about 15 years ago, and what we learned was all the things that you're saying around you need leaders on board. That's so key. You can have like really fantastic work going on in specific classrooms because you've one teacher who's really into it, but it's not going to transform the school if you haven't got the leaders on board. So it's really gratifying to hear that. The training over a longer period of time, fantastic, rather than just drop in and think you can do a 3-day training and you're done. Giving that time for reflection. So I think somebody mentioned, give it a go and then have a look at what worked and what didn't, and how that changes as you change your cohort of kids every year, because sometimes you have a great cohort of kids who really get it and other times you don't. And I also loved hearing about the idea of staff circles, because we think the children pick it up, they get it, they do a really great job, but a lot of the time the adults in the school don't want to make themselves that vulnerable. They don't want to sit in a circle and feel that way. So again, it was just really fantastic to hear that you've got schools out there that are going through the staff route as well. So it wasn't so much of a question as just a sort of thank you for everybody.
Thank you.
Experiences, but also I think that if you're not doing it that way, that's why people think it doesn't work. The trainer model really in, but it didn't work for us, and it's what didn't work for you because the approach didn't work, as opposed to restorative practice and relational schools doesn't work. And I think that's where it becomes really difficult as a restorative practitioner to hear people say it doesn't work, because it's generally not that it doesn't work, it's generally that unfortunately it didn't get implemented in a way that was going to be effective. So
thank you, Liz. That's great. We'll take your hand up as a high five, I think. We've got a question about, has anyone forged any relationships with local justice services? Anyone from our group? Yeah.
We have really close links actually with the police and youth justice. We have Restorative Gloucestershire, who've been going for 15 years something, who look at restorative justice in the community and in the criminal justice system, and they work very closely with the Youth Justice Service here. They've created Children's First, where any child or young person who comes into contact with the criminal justice system is offered a restorative justice conversation as a first kind of port of call, really, if it's deemed to be appropriate. So we work very closely between education, social care and the police and youth justice to make sure that we are offering a service for all young people.
Great. And Bec, you're saying that your PCC colleagues and youth justice are part of this as well. You can see on the chat there. Thanks. Nicola, did you have your hand up to contribute, or? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add, kind of on the last point, really, that one of the most important ongoing ways that we're trying to make things successful is the leadership training within the school, but that is through coaching conversation, really, and looking at specific scenarios and how leaders would approach that, so that we're continually getting the right modeling of relational practice. Because what you don't want to be doing is saying one thing that you do, but then different people in school are modeling other things. So and that has been a continual process that we need to sort of keep coming back to and reflecting on our own behaviour as leaders to make sure that the modelling is right.
Thanks, Nicola. Laura, response?
Yeah, I was going back to the original question around schools saying restorative wasn't working or relational wasn't working, and it brought two things to mind for me, really. One thing was around our definition of what that actually is and what that looks like, and if everyone's got those same definitions about what restorative practice and relational practice looks like, and if they're using that. And then the other thing was that the EAF model of the make, maintain and mend, and actually the time and the investment in the make and maintain, and schools not focusing on just that mend or the fix bit at the end, which is that restorative bit. That the time being spent on the make and the maintain is the key for all of this.
Thank you. Rosie?
Yeah, two things. First of all, in the chat, I noticed that Mark Hamill commented that participants commented that their training had been tokenistic and no time was given for any restorative process to develop. Presumably that's in relation to the NASUWT report on that things hadn't worked. So it was all about implementation and implementation failure. I read that as being. But then secondly, Chris Twyman asked him a question. He's had to leave, but I'm interested also. Well, in fact, he's a question in two parts. The first is, so I'm going to repeat it for him. I am curious whether the speakers feel like the education sector is leading the way in restorative practice, or is there still a long way to go? And then secondly, is each local authority sharing data and outcomes with each other? And I suppose I'm also interested in what the plans are to collate the data and, you know, make that visible and available.
Who's going to respond?
Yes, we are sharing data, sharing our stories really, but also we have, so Inga in my team is doing a PhD. She's in the last year at the moment, looking at writing up the impact of the leadership programme. Tom Proctorlegg is in Oxford writing up the impact of restorative practice and special needs. So there's quite a lot of research that's informing the practice as well at the moment. So we're with our Southwest regional group kind of sharing learning as we go. I think it's, you know, certainly changed in the 8 years I've been involved in the field. It's hugely changed. And that's down in part to the community of practice that we're developing, where we're all sharing practice, not just the local authorities, but, you know, with the lab, taking their learning nationally, internationally, you know, that's been huge for us, really.
I can't remember what time we're on, Rosie, so I trust you'll intervene when we're going over, but we've got till
1:30. So
oh right, okay, we're rich in time.
Yeah.
I can see hands up from Tracy and Alan also, so perhaps we can go to you two. Tracy.
Hi, thank you. So I work for Surrey County Council. I'm a specialist teacher, and I just want to say this has been just amazing and brilliant and inspirational. In Surrey, we're kind of running our own project with Mark Finnis, worked alongside him, and I'm sorry, but we're going to pinch so many ideas, and it's just really exciting to hear of what's going on in other areas, how positive it is and the impact. We have a 4-day leadership program for our schools that 3 members of SLT come on, and what we've been then doing is running network meetings once a term, which have been hugely successful. and an opportunity to share ideas, schools listening to each other. And that's been, I think, one of the things that's been really impactful for us, certainly in Surrey. Lots of our schools are doing solution circles and are doing the community circles as well, which has had a huge impact in school on the ground. And again, we keep saying to schools, it takes time, 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. I think that's really nice to hear that message from you all as well. I started my training probably 15 years ago with a police officer doing some restorative justice training. I then did Belinda Hopkins training. I've done Mark Finnis training. So it's just really exciting to see where we're going and where we can get to. And I just want to say thank you, because it's just really inspirational.
Thanks, Tracy. I feel I can say this, but well, trust me on this one. Bec, Laura, Claire, Molly, pick up the phone really quickly. So and have an open invitation and make a really good cup of tea. So go and visit and hang out, and they will invite you to their schools as well, I'm sure. Alan.
Yes, just a quickie, really. Just to say, it's worth remembering in this sharing business that we're in this restorative way, the children go home with this and they share it with their parents. We had 2 children from Trafalgar who went home and told mum and dad, who said, "What's this all about?" And they worked on that restorative model, and the family actually implemented a lot of that at home. So just remember the sort of spin-offs of this essential restorative work. It's brilliant, and thank you. It's been wonderful today to hear it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Anna, it's interesting. Sorry to put in, but interesting to hear if any of the partners have been doing. You've got work with parents, families.
Yeah, one of our schools was telling us actually, Rosie, that they tried a circle for their new early years cohort parents and nursery parents when they came in. And lots of the parents came in and said, you know, you don't have to take part in this, but this is what we're doing. And they'd got a parent that had a child already go through the schools in like year 5 or 6. And they said afterwards that they have absolutely no connection with any of the parents in that year group other than the WhatsApp of like, what day's PE. And she said instantly she felt she could reach out to any of those parents that had been in that circle, and that link was already there. So there's that community within it. So I think schools are slowly starting to drip it in. I think in some cases it's a bit more of a sharing the information and then dripping it to parents. But yeah, no, it's definitely starting to happen.
Nicola, you've got your hand up. Is that in response?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we've started solution circles with parents as a kind of specific coffee morning, so they know that they're coming to do a solution circle, and actually that has really changed the conversation from maybe feeling a bit kind of inward and thinking about how they're feeling stuck, or you know, it can sound a bit dwelling on the things that are going wrong, into a really positive way of helping each other. And the things that were coming out were brilliant and really made a difference to families' relationships. So we're going to carry those on as a regular thing.
Nicola, could you say a bit more? What sort of solution circles?
Well, basically, they were coming to talk about behaviour that they are struggling with their children at home. So it was as open as that. And there was a little brief thing before the first one, which explained what it was going to be. And it was facilitated by our family support worker, who's got used to working in a really relational way. And they did try and stick to timings and kind of try and have some of those rules around the circle. But they were also sort of just accepting of all of the ideas and told, you know, we'll listen to all of the ideas, because even though they might not help for this person's problem, they might help somebody else. But they came up with some really creative ways, things they tried at home, things that could work. But it more than anything else, I think our parents often feel so isolated, and that the problems that they are talking about you know, it's not something that anyone else goes through. If somebody's smearing feces around the bathroom, it's not something that you feel you can talk about in a normal kind of parent group. But in this situation, it was accepted, and actually it became a wonderful way for them to increase those relationships.
Thanks, Nicola. Hannah, I've seen your hand go up. Molly, I know you and I were on a call with Mark Thorsborn a few weeks back, and she was talking about parent workshops, and yeah, be interested to know how that's developing in Gloucestershire as well, if you've just got a soundbite to share.
Yeah, we're just working with our schools really to look at the different ways in which they work with their parents. So, you know, there's assemblies, there's tea and tissues is what they call your equivalent, Laura, for the reception parents. Circle work, we've done conflict resolution between parents and school. So at the moment, we're just kind of collating the different schools' initiatives to look at being able to roll out a more consistent offer and share those experiences across the schools.
Thank you. Hannah, have you got a question?
Yeah, I suppose what I would like to know is, in schools where maybe you've found yourself a long way down this journey by default, and you don't necessarily think that doing the whole thing is, some of your staff might be thinking around this might be quite advanced. Is there any way of running like a hybrid model that supports you in picking out the things that you can recognise in your school are the things that need to move forward, as opposed to doing the whole project? Because actually your staff might feel it was a bit like teaching grandma to suck eggs. I can see Claire's gonna be like, I'm gonna answer that.
Yeah,
Claire,
well, I
saw
think
Claire
I'm
in.
gonna hand it to Laura, I think, but I know that as you're aware, Hannah, that this started as a pilot and it's sort of evolving, and Laura's looking at how to sort of make it sustainable and business cases to sort of roll it out further. And yeah, for those that have been part of this particular rollout, I know Laura's got, you know, in mind that they may want to revisit down the road and sort of do a self-assessment and do what they feel they need, whether it's because that the leadership has changed or whatever. You know, it's something that you need to kind of revisit, isn't it, and make sure that it's fresh and alive. And I know Tom Proctor-Legg and Yvette at IFLI that they've done. I mean, Tom's done a paper around what essentially makes it so that that way of working is really embedded at IFLI, and it is around, as you said, Hannah, like it is who they are. It's who they are as opposed to that particular person. And so I'm sure Laura might want to speak about how your school could potentially get involved in some way and benefit in a way that meets your needs specifically at St Prideswides.
I've seen hands go up with Molly and Nicola. I think that's probably in response to this question, but Niels, we've seen you too, and we'll probably be wrapping up around then. So I'm hoping I can mind read. Laura, anything to add? And then Molly and Nicola, just based on how do we work with those schools that are already quite far down this process?
I'm guessing I know what Molly might be saying, so I don't know if Molly wants to say it before I do.
No, you go.
It was just going to say we are developing like a self-assessment audit tool for schools to use. I know, I think Gloucestershire are calling it the toolkit, and we're calling it well, so far it's the Relational Schools a self-assessment audit tool, which isn't a catchy title at all. It needs to be catchier, but there will be ways that schools can check themselves where they are on the journey with our support, and then we can do really targeted support around that. And also that will link into our kind of not accreditation, like our award level. So there are schools that think they are further on in the journey than they might do it and go, oh, actually we're really not. Or there are schools that might think we've not done very much and we need to do the full training, and they'll use the tool and then go, oh, actually we really need to focus on it might be staff training, or it might be that they really need to focus on the circles delivery. So there will be ways for us to do that, but perhaps that's a conversation we can have, Hannah, off chat.
Thanks, Nicola.
I think just with the idea that different staff will be at different levels, that's always the case. We've had huge numbers of new staff coming in, but I think the whole point of this is that you're trying to create a collaborative way of working, and that involves sharing expertise. So some of those people who've been doing it for a long time, it's essential that they're part of it, because there are the voices who are saying those things, and that kind of creates a way that is at that moment in time what that school feel as a community and are saying as a community, not just the new people that we have to induct in this, which kind of creates different cultures within the school, sort of like the old school, or oh, we've always used to do it in this way. So I think it's really important to keep everybody coming back to things and saying what is important to us as a community now with the children that we've currently got.
Thanks, Nicola. Neil, I need to put you under pressure here. I'm sorry, but very quickly, have you got a final question?
It's not a question. It's just first of all, I thank you for letting us come along to hear what you've got to say. I think it's amazing the work that you guys are doing, and we work in a very similar way with criminal justice and mental health services. But where we're struggling with is getting the relational practice awareness recognised in schools and colleges. So it's just really great to come along to events such as this to hear what you guys are doing, and just to encourage you to carry on and to see if there's any ways we can support or collaborate with you to get this good work rolling out forward, because we know so many pupils in schools and colleges that are suffering. There's only about 35% of them that are getting support at the moment, but there's a lot more who aren't. And relational practice is just so important across all public services. And the youth is where we need to start. We need to start with the youth so that we can give them a good grounding and a good basis, so that they don't grow up and go into different walks of life and ends up in all sorts of problems and become outcasts from society and don't become functional. So thank you very much for letting me come along, letting Rex come along so we could hear what you had to say. I have put a link to our website in the chat, and if we can support you in any way, then please do come in touch with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Niels. That's great. Yes, the Relational Schools Movement. Draw attention to that in the chat. We have a final slide that has our contact details on it, but I think Rosie's probably going to share these out. I'll flash it up before we go. But just to say, for me, I think the uniqueness from this partnership is that the people that you've heard from and other people that they support equally, they keep learning. So they recognise that they're grandmothers and they might be sucking eggs, but they're in meeting new grandmothers, they learn new stuff. And that is very evident in their personal practice, but also in their strategic development in their local authorities. Each of them are working hard to develop the infrastructure within their local authority context to be able to support this work. So it doesn't just become a nice to have that one person is championing, that it becomes business as usual. So they're really pioneering that way of working here in the UK, and I'm super proud of them. It's never done this stuff, is it? So, you know, we've got to keep going and keep learning from each other. I want to say thank you very much, and thanks to you know, Molly, Claire, Laura, and Bec and co, who've invited the lab in to support with this work. And I will hand you back to Rosie.
Thanks, Anna. But just briefly for me to really warmly thank our brilliant speakers and the inspiration. It's been encouraging to have the really positive feedback in the chat. If Joy was here, she'd be underlining that we'll send around the slide pack, and there'll be a link to the recording of the event. And in the slide pack, there are indeed contact details for all of the speakers. So to help us keep on making those connections as we go forward. Along with that, Joy will be sending out an evaluation link, because we're always really eager to hear about other areas colleagues and partners will be interested to hear about, and also to get your feedback on what worked for you from today, or what might not have worked and what you might do as a result. So stand by for the evaluation. Thank you again for all of your engagement. It's been brilliant to hear, to echo the feedback from participants, and look forward to seeing you next time.